I want to talk about more about being Hebrews versus Greek, and why encourage to be being a Hebrew over being Greek-minded, and how it benefits. I want to start in Genesis 14, verse 12, and I'll read 13 as well. This is in the deal where Abraham, or Abram at the time, what his name was, went after people that had taken Lot captive. Lot being Abraham's nephew. And we read here in verse 12 of Genesis 14, it says, they also took Lot, Abraham's nephew, and his possessions and departed, for he was living in Sodom. Then a fugitive came and told Abram the Hebrew. Now he was living by the oaks of Mamre, and the Amorite, brother of, and it talks about where he was living, and and Abraham goes and saves Lot. But it says Abram the Hebrew. Now let's explore why one of the things that would make Abraham a Hebrew, or maybe a couple of things. For one thing, we read in Genesis 26, verse 5, it says, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So Isaac lived in Ger, and talking about where Isaac settled. Let's go up to verse 4. It says, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, and my statutes. My commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So he kept the laws. If they didn't exist until later, how is Abraham keeping them? How is Noah knowing the difference between clean and unclean animals? And, different things. But that is, I believe, one of the reasons why he is a Hebrew. And then, what I talked about in my last video from Exodus about being Hebrews, and you can read a couple of different places about the Hebrews. Things that they did, or there's one in, I think it's 1 Samuel 6, about being Hebrew. There's one in Acts 6. And this, to me, this one in Acts 6 is kind of interesting. It says, starting in verse 1, and then verse 2 is where we're going. Now at this time, while the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint arose on the part of the Hellenistic Jews against the native Hebrews, because their widows were being overlooked in the daily serving of food. So the 12 summoned the congregation of the disciples and said, It is not desirable for us to neglect the word of God in order to serve tables. Therefore, brethren, select from among you 7 men of good reputation. But see that there is a distinction between the Hellenistic, the Greek Jews, and the native Hebrews. There is a difference, and that difference exists even today with people, even among believers in Messiah. You've got the people that are still Roman Christianity, Greek mindset, that are coming out, but they've still got that mindset. May have gotten away from the hyper grace that you see in the traditional Christianity today. But then at the same time, there's things that they don't want to grow beyond. They may or may not believe in seats. And these are not salvation issues. They are tools. They are ways to walk. And like, I realize that the calendar is, the Gregorian calendar is what most people live by, because that's the world they interact with the most, and why it's so hard for them to get out of the Greek mindset. They may go to a Messianic Hebraic congregation, but they do that once or twice a week, and they spend the rest of the time in a Greek mindset because they live in a Greek world. We're meant to be set apart from that. That's the whole a big part of this. People will argue over Leviticus 19:27 that talks about you shall not harm the edges of your beard. Well, you can't harm if you don't have it. You can't harm it if you don't have it. And there's prophecies that say Yeshua had his beard plucked out, and there's ones where David's men were disgraced because they had shaved part of some people that David had sent these messengers to came back, and they had, whether it was part of their beard shaved or whatever, I don't know. But people will argue, well, it says that it's about mourning in Leviticus 19:27. Okay, fine, whatever. But the fact still remains, you can't harm it if you don't have it to begin with. How are people going to see are you going to grow out a goatee? Just as part of mourning? How does anyone outside know whether you're mourning or not? Outside of your circles, how do they know if you're mourning or not? How do you know they don't take the goatee and think, oh, well, that person's in mourning? If they read the scriptures, and that's part of the thing, is we become hypocrites in a lot of ways. And by the same token, I can't sit there and say, you must do this, you must do that, because if it's not conviction to, like, for women especially, to grow their hair long, to me, longer hair, especially on women, is part of the symbol of their devotion to God, based on Numbers 6, the Nazirite vow. Men and women were not to cut their hair. It was a symbol, which is kind of the idea behind this. No one says it has to be this long. But, that's my choice, and what other people choose is up to them. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's the way I kind of feel about it, is times are getting tough. They're getting tougher and tougher and tougher, and if we're unwilling to be set apart now, how are we going to be set apart when the real tribulation starts? That's my question, is how are we going to be set apart? And I realize it takes some learning, it takes some growth. I've gotten to the point where I try to just focus on, well, there's a new moon, there's a new moon, there's a new moon, from month to month to month. And to think, and it's about 2 months away from Sukkot, and I'm already kind of excited about it and praying for people, praying for spiritual protection as we approach, and the spiritual attacks get more and more, because he wants us unclean. But we are meant to be a holy nation, a royal priesthood. And I feel like the more we get into the Hebraic, the more powerful that becomes. So that's just my thoughts. Shalom, shalom.